right there, Latin 4. Here we are, 126. Livy 126. The battle is over. That's really cool. But what I love about this story is what happens next. Before they departed from there, when Metius was asking what was ordered from the treaty that was struck, Tullus ordered him, Metius, to have the youths get into their arms, that he, Tullus, would use the service of them if a war with the Veantes was to break out. So, yeah, there's a lot of wars going on because the guy is living up to his last name. Thus, the armies were led from there to their homes. So, like, basically, what do we do now that we've all watched this war? None of us fought. He's like, let's get going up to the Veantes because we might need to fight them. Horatius was marching at the front of the line, carrying before him the triplet arms that had been stripped from their defeated enemies, and his virgin sister, who had been betrothed to one of the Curiatii, met him in front of the Porta Capena. And when she recognized the cloak of her betrothed over her brother's arms that she herself had made, she tore apart her hair and tearfully called out her dead fiancé by his name. Remember, there are a lot of people in the Alban territory who had family in the Roman territory and vice versa. The violent lament of his sister moved the fierce soldier's mind, and in the face of his so great and public celebration and victory. And so, as soon as he was rebuking her with his words, after he had drawn his sword, he stabbed the girl. Quote, "Go away to your fiancé from here, with your premature devotion," since she wasn't married. He said, "since you have forgotten your dead brothers and your alive brother, since you have forgotten your homeland. Thus should you go and die. Thus should any Roman woman go and die who would mourn their enemy." The horrible deed, it outraged the patricians and the commoners, but his recent service stood in contrast to the action. So here's the thing: you don't get to kill Roman citizens. You're not allowed to. So it's a horrible deed, and he did it in front of everybody. However, he was seized and brought under the law to the king, and the king, lest he himself be the author of such sadness and thanklessness to the people, and the author of such a judgment, and of following the law of such a sacrifice, he called for a council of the people. "I nominate 2 men," he said, "who shall judge Horatius for high treason according to the law." It is high treason to kill a citizen of Rome. The rule of the frightening formula was as follows, quote, "The 2 men shall judge the high treason, and if he shall appeal from the judgment of the 2 men, let there then be a trial from this appeal. If they win, the 2 men, then let the lictor cover his head, and let the lictor hang his head with a rope on the fruitless tree." They had a specific tree. "Let the lictor beat him either within or outside of the sacred boundary." Okay, so there were rules on how to deal with this. The 2 men were appointed by this law, who, according to this law, did not think that they were able to pardon even the innocent when they had condemned him. So, yeah, you as a judge, if you've condemned him to that thing, you can't commute his sentence. Then one of them said, "Publius Horatius, I judge you of high treason. Go, lictor, bind his hands." And the lictor had approached. Now, a lictor is like an attendant, a bailiff, a bodyguard for the king. Okay, so he basically had 2 men. They had a trial. They found him guilty of high treason because they had all the evidence. Back then, all it took was evidence of a crime, and even if the guy was well liked, you could actually have him convicted. It's crazy. Now it's well, yeah. Let's see. Go and bind his hands. The lictor had approached and set out the noose, and then Horatius, at Tullus's urging, with a generous interpretation of the law, said, so Tullus Hostilius realizes he can't pardon this guy, and he has to follow the law, because if the king doesn't follow the law, then the people will revolt, which tells us actually that even the monarchy was a constitutional one. So the king can't not follow the law. That looks bad. Yeah, it turns out back then people had respect for the law at the very top of the power structure. But he did urge Horatius. He's like, look, when they find you guilty, and it's their job to find you guilty, do this, and then we can move on. So, with a generous interpretation of the law, Horatius said, with Tullus's urging, I appeal. And so with that appeal, the challenge was put to the people. Fun thing about Roman law. The people were moved in this case, mostly when Publius Horatius, the father of the appellant, proclaimed that he, the father, judged the cutting down of his daughter to be done justly. So it's like, she kind of had it coming. Was this not so? He would punish his son by the rights of the father. So if this wasn't done justly, he would have killed his son himself, because the father has that power. Then he was beginning, begging. Then he was begging that they not make him bereft of a child, whom a little before they had seen him with excellent offspring. So, keep in mind, he's already lost 3 kids today. He doesn't want to lose the 4th. While the old man was saying these things, he held the young man in an embrace, and showing the stripped-off armor of the defeated Cariatii set up in the place which is now called the Horatian column. It's also called the Horatian spear. Quote, can you see, Quirites, he said, this man, marched bound under the stocks and tortured among beatings, whom just now you saw was decorated and celebrated in victory? Can you all bear to see him like that? So, in other words, he was just at the front of a procession having conquered in our name, and now you want him at the front of a procession getting beaten? This is so terrible a sight that scarcely can the eyes of even the Albans bear it. Those people down the road. Go, lictor, bind his hands, which just a little earlier were armed, and they won the right to rule for the Roman people. Go, cover the head of the liberator of this city. Hang him from the fruitless tree. Beat him either within the holy boundary, only among the spears and stripped-off armors of his fallen enemies, or do it outside of the holy boundary, only do it amongst the tombs of the Cariatii. For where can you lead this lad, where his accomplishments will not vindicate him from such a foul punishment that you will deliver upon him? The people did not bear neither the tears of the father nor the spirit of the son equal to every danger, and they pardoned him, more from admiration of his manliness than the justice of his cause. Okay, he did it and he shouldn't have, but he did just save us. And now the people are the ones calling for it. So the king is not breaking the law. And so, as an obvious murder, however, it must be appeased by some other little pious action, it was ordered to the father to atone for his son with public money. So literally they took tax money and they gave it to the father and said, okay, now go make things right for your son. Once he made certain appeasing sacrifices, so take this money, go buy a couple rabbits, which they were then given to the Horatius clan, he put across the road a small piece of wood, or a beam, okay? And he sent his son with his head covered just as if it were under a yoke, under the beam. Now, that's actually a very important punishment back then. If you have to walk under the beam, it's very, very shamey. It's awful. We don't have a similar thing in America, but there you go. Today, it also stays, the beam, and it's always maintained at public expense. So that was under Tullus Hostilius, the third king, so we're talking in the 600s. And today, when Livy's writing is over 600 years later, they still had that beam. 600 years and they had that beam, and it's maintained at public expense. They call it the Sister's Beam. The tomb of Horatia, on that spot where she had been killed, had been built, and it was made from squared stone, because that's a detail worth mentioning. That's the end of the story. I think that's far more fascinating than just, yeah, they won and now the Romans ruled the Albans. Like, there was this whole legal thing that happened, and the king had to figure out how to get out from under it. He doesn't want to be the king who killed a hero, but he doesn't want to be the king who let off a murderer. So he let the people be the people who let off a murderer, and then we can all share the shame collectively. Anyway, it was really long, but I really liked it. And then after this is going to be book 9, 17 through 19, which are my favorite ones. So anyway, I'm going to hit the button.